everyone, Kelly here, and today I wanted to do a tag. I'm going to do the middle grade book tag. This was originally created by Amanda at the Curly Reader, and I was tagged by Krista from BooksAndJams. Part of the reason she created this at this time is that March has a readathon going on called Middle Grade March, where people read middle grade books. I love this readathon. I love middle grade, so anything I can do to talk about middle grade books, I'm gonna do. So I'm excited that I got tagged and I have so many middle grade books to talk about in this tag. So let's get started. The first question is, what is the last middle grade book you read? And because I read a lot of books at the same time, like I'll have like an ebook and an audiobook and a physical book and all that going on at the same time, I ended up finishing 5 books, middle grade books, yesterday. So I'm gonna talk about 2. I'm gonna talk about one I liked and one I didn't like. And the one I didn't like was The Book of Boy by Catherine Gilbert Murdoch. I'll obviously talk about this more in my next recent reads. But yeah, this one was just kind of disappointing for me. I expected kind of a great adventure story, which is what I love about middle grade fantasy. And this is middle grade fantasy historical fiction. And yeah, it just didn't do it for me. I didn't enjoy it. But then the book I did enjoy, or one of the books I enjoyed and finished yesterday, was The Trumpet of the Swan by E.B. White. And my 5-year-old and I read this together. This is the first chapter book that we have read together. It was a lot of fun. We listened to it sometimes in the car on the way to preschool, and then at night we would read a chapter from the actual book, and she loved it. She's still talking about it, like all about the swan and everything like that, and just loved it. I really enjoyed it. So even as an adult, I'd recommend this, and it's a great read along with young kids if you have little ones. The next question is, what is a middle grade book that someone read to as a child? And the thing is that I have a horrible memory of childhood. Like, I just don't have a lot of memories for some reason. I don't remember a lot of things that happened like 2 years ago. I just don't have good memory. So I don't really have like specific memories of sitting and being read to, even though I know I was, because I've always loved books. I know that my parents read to me. My mom's an avid reader and stuff like that. So I know I was read to. I just don't really remember specific books, but I remember loving The Wind in the Willows when I was a kid. And this is a longer book for like a young child to read. You know, it's like a full-on novel. So I'm pretty sure I would have been read this to by my family. And I remember we had one of those versions that's like the big version that has all the pictures and has like, you know, it's like kind of like a collector's edition of like a big one. I don't have that one anymore, I don't think. So I do remember reading this book with all the animals and stuff in it, and I'm sure that my parents read it to me. And the next one is, what was your favorite middle grade book as a child? And this I do remember very specifically loving Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. I remember reading this like every year, like before I hit puberty, because I was just like anticipating this whole like turning into a woman thing. And this book like explains all of those processes, buying your first bra, first period, all that stuff. And I just loved this book as a kid because I was like really anxious about what was going to happen as I got older, and so I would read this for like information. I did read this last year as an adult, and it's not as good as an adult. It's definitely meant for that age of a child, of a girl. So wouldn't recommend this for adults to read, but yes, this was one of my favorite books as a kid. You can tell even from like how beat up this cover is that I read this over and over again. The other ones that I definitely remember reading all the time were the Babysitter Club book series. I read like all of them I could get my hands on. My mom and I would go to like used bookstores and I would just buy whatever I found there. Love that series. I unfortunately didn't keep any, which makes me sad, but I just got rid of my whole collection as I got older, but I did love those books as a kid. Next is, what is your favorite middle grade book as an adult? And you know, this might be basic, but I'll have to say that Harry Potter, and I don't know how many of the Harry Potter books you would consider middle grade. I know that I would at least consider the first 2 to be middle grade, maybe the third one before it starts getting really dark. And I didn't read these as a kid. I didn't start them until I was, I think like 22, 23 was the first time that I read Harry Potter. And by that point, I think 5 of the books were out, and I read them all in like a couple days, and then was waiting patiently for 6 and 7 to come out, not very patiently. But yes, I loved these books as an adult, still an adult, have read them several times, and planning on doing a reread this year. So yes, this is probably still my favorite as an adult, though if we're talking about a newer favorite, since that was over 10 years ago that I read that for the first time, newer is Keeper of the Lost City series. I'm on book 5. This is book 5, and so far the first 4 I have absolutely loved and really enjoying getting into this series. So this would be a new favorite middle grade book. The next question is, what is your favorite middle grade author? And I have 2 for this because I own and have read most of their middle grade books, and I even talked about them in my recent video about middle grade fantasy recommendations. And the first one is Gail Carson Levine. I read 5 of her books, I believe, these 4 and Ever. I didn't like Ever, but all 4 of these I loved. So I've got Tale of Two Cities, Two Princes of Bamar, Ella Enchanted, and Fairest, and I plan on reading The Lost Kingdom of Bamar this month. And I just love how she writes like kind of fairy tale, princessy type books that I just still adore even as an adult. She's one of my favorite authors. And then my other one I've talked about a lot, so you probably know, and that's Shannon Hale. And I have not read all of her middle grade books because I'm not a big fan of the Ever After series. I tried them, but they're just not my thing. I prefer these ones that are more like fairy tale like. Book of 1,000 Days is one of my all-time favorite books. So is Princess Academy. And then I want to reread the books of Bayern because I really enjoyed them when I read them about 10 years ago and want to read them again. So I would say those 2 authors are 2 of my favorite middle grade authors, and they write the same kind of like fairy tale type stories, and it's just one of my favorite things to read. They're like comfort reads to me. And the next question is, what middle grade book do you think should be required reading in school? I think about something that has maybe more about diversity and acceptance and stuff like that. And so the book I would pick would be Harbor Me by Jacqueline Woodson. And I read this one last year for middle grade March, and it was 5 stars. It was really good. And it is a contemporary book about 6 5th graders, and they're basically like told to hang out in this room and talk to each other. And each one of them is experiencing some difficulties in their life, and that's part of why the teachers ask them to go and be able to support each other. And you just hear each of their stories, and their experiences range from things like parental incarceration, police profiling, deportation, bullying. Like every one of them has a different story, and they're all impactful. There's lots of diversity, and I just think that this is a great one for kids nowadays to read, that they're like, you know, a lot of people out there, everybody has their own story, and it's important to listen to people's stories and see where they come from. So I would highly recommend that one for school, but then also just to read it because I think it's a really great book. The next question is, what is your favorite middle grade book cover? And for this, I have been collecting the Barnes & Noble's collectible classics. I think that's what it's called. I don't know what they are, but I have a lot of the children's ones because I just think they're beautiful. Like this, they all have like the foil on it. So that's Heidi and Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan. Like I just love these. And actually right now I'm reading A Little Princess, and sometimes I just sit and stare at this book covers because it is just so gorgeous. So I just love all these Barnes & Noble editions, and they have a ton of the children's classics in this edition. And I just love them, and I will continue to buy them if they continue to come out with them because they're classic stories that I want to own anyways, and they're beautiful covers. And the last question is, what is your favorite middle grade book to screen adaptation? And the weird thing is, I read lots of middle grade books. I love middle grade stories. I especially love middle grade fantasy and adventure stories, which so many of them have been turned into movies. But I just don't watch the movies. Is that sad? I mean, I've watched the Harry Potter movies and I like them, and I've watched several movies, but I would say a lot of the popular ones like Matilda and some of those other ones that are really popular middle grade books turned into movies, I haven't watched them. So it took me a little bit to think about this, but then I realized, like right now I am watching Anne with an E on Netflix, which is an adaptation from Anne of Green Gables. I had read Anne of Green Gables in January and absolutely loved it. It became a new favorite book, a new favorite series as I've been reading through it. And so I was like, I need to watch Anne with an E. And for those of you that haven't watched it, it is not a very true adaptation. Like, it's the characters from Anne of Green Gables, but they definitely take a much different, like, darker approach. Like, these books are very lighthearted. Yeah, Anne is an orphan at the beginning and she does go through hard stuff, but I would say the show is definitely much more hard-hitting and focuses more on the harder parts of her life than the happy-go-lucky stuff the book does. And I have cried in like every single episode of the first season, like bawling, like my husband coming in and go, "What's wrong?" I'm like, just watching Anne with an E and crying constantly. So yeah, I have been watching that and loving it. So that would probably be my favorite one at this point. And so now I'm gonna tag a few people. Some people I know read middle grade and enjoy them, so I'd love to hear their answers. And so I'll tag Summer from Summer's Moving Bookshelf, Victoria from Victoria Reads Too Much, Charlie from ReaderTurnedWriter, and Victoria James Book Reviews. So those 4 people are tagged. Hope you would, and if anybody else wants to do the tag, go ahead, share the middle grade book love. And if you want to talk to me about any middle grade books in the comments, I always like to talk about that. See you next time. Bye.